please begin, Bill, by telling us about your early childhood? When and where were you born?
I was born in Detroit, January 12th, 1931, about a block and a half behind Ford Hospital, in the middle of the freeway. And people raise their eyebrows, and I say, yes, I was born in what is now the southbound lane of the Lodge Freeway. So I was literally born in the middle of the freeway. Excuse me. My parents lived there till I was 5 years old, and then we moved to Pontiac, from Pontiac to Troy Township, and pretty much the rest is history. And so my schooling has always been out in this area.
Can you tell us about your mom and dad?
Well, my dad was from England, and met my mother after he was first in the Royal Navy, and after the Royal Navy he joined the U.S. Army. After he was discharged from the U.S. Army, he settled in Detroit and had a job at a bank, and didn't know first thing about banking, but he had a chance to get into the bank, and times were tough then. This was in Depression years, and he worked at the bank, and he met my mother when she would come into the bank, and she was from Kentucky, and her family migrated to Michigan seeking employment, and as many families did in those days, and so they met and were married, and I have a half sister, and her dad and my mother were divorced, so my mother then adopted my sister Kathy. So there's just the two of us, Kathy McAfee, and she lives in Rochester, and been there almost all of her life. She, like I, went to Brooklyn School, and then from Brooklyn School to Rochester High School, and then she went on to Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio, and I went in the Marine Corps, and here we are today.
Who were your friends when you were a young boy, and what did you do for fun?
Who were my friends with?
When you were a little boy, and what did you do for fun?
Oh, gosh, those days, Lorraine, being a child in rural Avon Township was much different than what it might be now. We were all little farmers. The homes were all, everybody had a cow. Almost everyone had a cow, a few pigs and some chickens. And it was, I can remember that we would, my friends that lived along the street in Avon, we would play in the wooded areas around our homes, and there was little tunnels through the underbrush where the pigs would travel, and we just had all sorts of experiences playing Marine, if you would, or I never played Cowboys and Indians. I always went with the playing Marines, and the neighbors we'd all play similar games. And my next door neighbor was Bill Verdon, and that name may not sound familiar to you, but Bill was ended up in his lifetime and as being manager of the New York Yankees and the Pittsburgh Pirates, and he was manager of several professional baseball teams. So he was right down the street he was my next door neighbor, although it was half a mile apart. He was my next door neighbor. And we started at Brooklyn School in 1935, and his folks moved to Missouri in about 39 or 40. And but we've kept in touch over the years. And as a matter of fact, Bill Verdon was my guest for Rotary Club a couple of years back, and he spoke to the club, and we reminisced a bit about growing up in rural Avon Township, Michigan. Did I cover the fact of where I went to grade school?
You told us it was Brooklyn School,
yeah, Brooklyn's.
But do you have a special memory of it?
Yeah, Brooklyn School, because we walked to school. There weren't school buses then, and everybody walked to school. And I walked with Bill Verdon, as I told you, the one who was later the manager of the New York Yankees. And we walked up and down the residential streets in Auburn Road, and it was a schoolhouse where everybody went into one building. It wasn't a one room, but it was one building. And my formative years were from Brooklands, and then went on to Rochester. But those were special days too.
Do you have a special teacher you remember?
Yeah, now there I'll name a name. When you ask about a special person in Troy that I admire a great number of people in Troy for what they've accomplished. But back to grade school, I guess Miss McLean. And you don't know Miss McLean, but you know her sister, Thelma Holberg. And Miss McLean is Thelma Holberg's sister. And she was my very favorite. I think she taught the second grade, maybe. But Miss McLean.
A very special lady with a very special sister. So, and then you worked for years with Thelma and Al.
Oh yeah, that's on the historical preservation. Yes, mm-hmm. With them. In high school, I didn't have a special. I had some favorites, but Miss McLean probably is the one that helped formulate my appreciation for teachers and to learn. She did a good job of
I think she
trying.
Would be very proud of what her student accomplished.
Well, I've seen her since. She's deceased now, but I had the pleasure of seeing her afterward. And fine lady, fine lady.
Now, you've started talking about the Marines, and you mentioned playing Marines when you were a little boy.
Yeah.
What drew you to the Marines and enlisting at a very young age, and would you tell us more about your military experience?
Well, as I said, I didn't play cowboys and Indians, and that's really the truth. I always played Marine. I can remember writing USMC on everything. You know, my toys, Bill Price, USMC. What drew me to it, I don't know. I'm not real sure, except the fact that I had a great admiration for those that I'd seen, and you have to keep in mind that World War II was just over, and Iwo Jima and Solomon Islands and places like that were very fresh in the minds of all the people, and I guess probably Iwo Jima is when I decided I'm going to be part of that, and you know, part of the Marine Corps, and so I tried to enlist when I was 17 because I wasn't doing very good in high school. I had two main interests in high school. One was girls, and the other was my 35 Ford, and neither of them pursued my academics. But I struggled along until my senior year, and I was just making it the senior year scholastically. And my folks, my dad would have signed for me at 17, but my mother wouldn't. So at age 18, on my 18th birthday, I raised my hand and enlisted. And we were at peacetime then, and soon after that we went to war in Korea. So my first assignment was Parris Island, South Carolina. A lot of horror stories about Parris Island, but it was it is a tough training base. But you come out of there, you know teamwork, and you understand what's going on. And the young boy that went on board the island in January 13th or 14th, 1949, came off of the island in April as a Marine, as a man, and it was just excellent training, and made the best of me come out. So I was able to accomplish the goal I wanted, and then the rest is history. And then the Korean War came along, and I was very fortunate. I wasn't in combat. I was in the 2nd Marine Division, Fleet Marine Force, which means the FMF portion. It's made up of the Navy and Marine Corps. So I became FMF, again, Fleet Marine Force, and we did all of our landing in different places by boat. It all went in landing craft, and then we would establish beachheads and move on from there.
Can you tell me how long did you serve in the active military?
Well, I was about 4 years and 4 months, because I was in twice. I went in first and served my first enlistment, and got out of the Corps because I had a 6-year obligation to serve in the reserve, and that was just prior to the outbreak of the war. And then in middle and summer of 1950, the Chinese Communists invaded North Korea along with the North Koreans, and that's when they crossed the 38th parallel, and we became part of that endeavor. And so I was, as I said, I've always felt I was very fortunate because I didn't go into combat, and only because my name started with P, because my outfit was divided in half, and whenever orders would come down from the division, we would call fall out at noon chow, and the officer of the day read off those that were going to be airlifted to Camp Pendleton, California, and from there to Hawaii, and from Hawaii on to Yokosuka, Japan. And the rest of us stayed and joined the Fleet Marine Force Atlantic. And my name being in the bottom half of the alphabet, the first part of the alphabet went to the 1st Marine Division, the bottom half went to the 2nd Marine Division. That's just how it was decided. And so I stayed with the 2nd Marine Division up until I was discharged. And then I spent 8-9 years more in the reserve after that.
So how did this experience with the Marines shape your life and change your personal philosophy?
Well, Lorraine, one thing, it was the changing of a young man from girls and Ford cars and skipping school to a very serious outlook on life. And so that helped me. I grew up. I went in as a kind of a reckless youth. Drugs and alcohol were never a problem in my generation or with me personally, but skipping school and girls were pretty high priority. And so therefore the Corps helped me establish and find myself. And I went on and graduated through the Armed Forces Institute in Madison, Wisconsin, and got my high school diploma, and therefore Wayne State accepted it when I became a civilian.
And then you chose a career in mortuary science. What led you to that career choice?
Oh, that's a long, twisted road also. I worked in a gas station at Auburn and Rochester Roads, Sinclair gas station, for several years, and was starting at about age 13 to about 16, I worked at the gas station, and I would see one or both of the funeral directors from Rochester come in there. They'd come in with their vehicles, and just normal questions I would ask them. I became interested in funeral service and thought maybe I'd like to get a job in the funeral home, and but then I went on to the big money when I was 18, the big money at Truck and Coach plant in Pontiac, and I lied my age. I was 17, but told them I was 18 so I could be hired. And at age 17, I went to work for Truck and Coach, General Motors Truck and Coach. And then when September came along, I found I was out of a job because I had to go back to school. And so when I got out, I looked around at places to work, and my job at the gas station was taken because while I was gone, they hired someone naturally in my place. And there was a memo that went through Rochester High School that the principal would put out on announcements daily. And this one particular day, there was an announcement that one of the funeral homes needed a boy to do surface work, a tall boy to do surface work, tall boy. And I thought, well, I don't know what the surface work is, but I'm tall, so I guess maybe I can fit the bill. Well, there's only 2 of us applied for it. It wasn't a job that people were thronging to go to work at a funeral home. And the other fellow happened to be about to hear on me. He was a short man. And so I guess solely with my height is how I got the job. But it bothered me when I first went to work. It was at the A.C. Hobart Funeral Home in Rochester, which later became the Winkle Potere Funeral Home, and then later Potere. And then I served my apprenticeship at Pixley Funeral Home because the Pixley children and I went to high school together, so we were buddies. But I went to work at Hobart, and I didn't really feel comfortable. I liked the work, but being around death and caskets particularly bothered me. For example, my boss would have me go to the casket selection room to dust the caskets, and I would catch myself looking over my shoulder like that because I was uncomfortable. But yet on the other side of the coin, I was very comfortable with working with families and helping them when I could for the menial tasks that I had as an unlicensed person. And my fellow workers helped train me and did a good job. And then the war broke out, and back in the Marine Corps I went. And I was selling cars part-time at Community Motor Sales in Rochester. I'd work at the funeral home and then sell cars. And I was Smiling Bill, the friend of the working man. It was, my business card said that, Bill Price, a Smiling Bill, friend of the working man. And I worked there until when I got the call from the Navy Department to report in. And I had the opportunity to get some training in mortuary science, but I didn't get in on any of the technical part, but I got working with families, driving a car, putting funeral flags on, things of that sort, and a lot of cleaning and a lot of leaf raking and that sort of thing. But yet I was always drawn back to it. I would sell cars and then go back to the funeral home. And then in 1956 I gambled on an old farmhouse in Troy, and that old farmhouse led us to where we are today.
So why did you choose Troy as the place to establish the Price Funeral Home?
Oh, that's another story. In school, I had decided long before going to mortuary school, I decided while I was in liberal arts that I wanted to go into funeral service, and I wanted it to be local. I didn't want to go out of state or out of town or out of state. And I drove right down Rochester Road, up and down every day going to Wayne State. It was Wayne University then, it later became Wayne State. And drove right by this lot, but I never paid much attention to this lot because it was a vacant field. So as I said, I drove back and forth between the two, Rochester where I lived and Wayne State. And in the evenings, I would go out and look for sites to build a funeral home, to convert a funeral home, not to build. I had no money. And a fellow that I went to mortuary school with by the name of Jerry Bodemer accumulated $5,000, and I accumulated $5,000. So we pooled our $10,000 and put it down on a house, which is 2501 Rochester Road, and we converted that home into a funeral home. And Jerry left shortly after we went in business. He didn't care particularly for Troy, and there wasn't that much business because everybody that was in Troy had someone else other than Bill and Jerry in mind when a death occurred. And I think that one thing that helped me get well known in the area was the ambulance service that I provided. And the nearest ambulance other than in Highland Park was our colleagues in Clawson, but they didn't really pursue it much, and one in Hazel Park, both funeral directors. And then there would be nothing until we got to Rochester to the north and Utica to the east. So I provided ambulance service, and that helped me get known. And we provided ambulance service up until 1974. 56, yes, 1974. And then I entered into a proposition with Suburban Ambulance in Royal Oak that if we would discontinue service, they would take over. There was no cash transacted. It was just Glenn Seelbinder, the owner there, wanted to make sure I wouldn't change my mind and 6 months later go back in ambulance service. And so I told him no. When we got out, we were going to be out for good, because the people that I had helping me really weren't ambulance people. They were more interested in funeral service. And Troy was growing to the point where it was soon going to be a full-time job. We operated the ambulance right out of this building. In the middle of the night, we'd get a call from the police department, and I'd take off and run the call from here, and I'd pick up either the person that was on duty with me would come in here, or I'd pick them up on the way if I'd go by their home. And it got to the point where it was really getting into a big business. And I just would had to have formed a separate company. And my sons were young enough then that, they were in grade school and middle school, so I couldn't count on them. Had it been reversed, where the boys were a little bit older, they probably could have taken over and we would have stayed in ambulance service for a long time. But we didn't, and in 1974 we discontinued, June of '74. So that kind of brought us up to date on where we were with ambulance-wise.
At this time, too, you also got involved in a lot of community service organizations. Can you tell us about some of your activities? Yeah,
I can. I am the only charter member of the Troy Rotary Club, and I proudly wear my lapel pin. I became a member of Rotary and of Exchange Club, and I couldn't put both on at the same time. But the Troy Exchange Club, which is a service club also. But I joined, I'm not a charter member of the Exchange Club. Mm-hmm. They chartered as the Big Beaver Businessmen's Association in the late, the early 50s, and then later changed to Exchange Club, Troy Exchange. But I am the sole charter member of the Troy Rotary Club, and so my endeavors were on those two service organizations. And I didn't join the Chamber of Commerce right at the start, so I'm not a charter member of the Chamber of Commerce, but I'm a very early member. My number is something like 40 or 60, and just real soon after it became organized. And the Clawson-Troy Elks, charter member nearly of the Clawson-Troy Elks. When I say nearly, I was all scheduled to be sworn in at the Elks Club in Royal Oak with the rest of my colleagues, and I got an ambulance call. And so guess what happened? I took the ambulance call and I missed the charter installation, so I came in the second group. My number in the Elks Club, is 430, and they chartered with 400. So I went in with the second group. So that was Clawson-Troy Elks. Then I became very much interested in Troy history, and I joined the Troy Historical Society, and it's just a wonderful group of people. And some of those people, Lorraine, whom you know and I know, are still involved with it. Speaking of people like the Barnards and the Holbergs, just just wonderful people, and they've worked so hard over the years. And we had our hand and eye shows where we'd work to make money so that we could move the schoolhouse from Square Lake Road down to the Village Green, and you know, moving the other buildings. That would take a long time to explain all of that, but all of those buildings we moved in, except the print shop, which was the meter repair shop, water meter repair shop. We made that into the print shop, and then the museum building, the proper, was not only where City Commission met. Again, it wasn't council yet. City Commission. It was the jail. It was the court. It was the water department, and everything was right there in that building. And as I say, including the jail.
Right.
Had that famous one-cell jail in the basement. And that was the early beginning of the city of Troy. And then the city offices, or those offices, moved over to Fire Station number 3, which was on the south side of Big Beaver. It's on the north side now, as we know. But on the south side, the courts moved in there, and the police department and fire department moved in there.
Tell me about the service projects and the mission of the Young Rotary Society, or Rotary Club.
On a local basis, we had all kinds of projects. We've done everything from car washes, newspaper collections, scrap paper, you know. We had a horse show that only had one that kind of flopped, so we didn't repeat that. That was up at the farm on South Boulevard. But our big projects were the Snowmobile Derby, and you've got to be an old timer, I guess, in Troy to remember the Snowmobile Derby. And just like an Exchange Club, the horse shows. Mm-hmm. People say horse shows. Horse shows where? And it was 16 and Crooks.
Now, was it through Rotary that you here at the funeral home provided loaned medical equipment?
Yeah, it became a project of Rotary. I started out early. I started the business in '56, and in early of 1957, a lady by the name of Mercedes Brown passed away over on Crooks Road. And the Browns lived at the creek, just north of Maple Road on John R. And Mrs. Brown had a wheelchair, and she passed away, and we had the funeral. And in talking with the family afterward, he said, what am I going to do with this wheelchair? And I said, well, Mr. Brown, why don't you let us have it, and we'll loan it out in your wife's name to the community. Well, he thought that was great, and so does his children. And it kind of spread. If you had a wheelchair, a bedpan, a urinal, a wheelchair that you weren't using, let's give it to Price Funeral Home. Crutches, I guess I said wheelchair twice, but crutches, canes, bedpans, any kind of invalid equipment. And we stocked it right. The storage of it was here at the funeral home. And people would call, and we'd have a list of, if you were calling about it, we'd write your name and address down and phone number, and you were on your honor to bring it back, to take care of it as best you could. And we had pretty good luck with it. But it got to be that it was pretty big as Troy was growing, like all the other things, ambulance service and everything else. The area was growing. And so people would borrow the equipment, and we had a few unfortunate experiences where, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody decides to bring a wheelchair back when they'd nipped the bottle a little too much or something. But we kept it for a long time, and then finally I said to the Rotary Club, I said, I think this is something that we should do as a club, and we all can share in it.
Was Exchange the group that did the crime prevention posters
yes.
for school
yes.
children?
And if we had time, or perhaps you remember if you've been in before, in our hallway in the new portion of the building, the new addition, we have the Exchange Freedom Shrine, which is a group of about 50 plaques of historical documents starting with the Declaration of Independence and so forth, and right up through World War II, the surrender documents, and then later Martin Luther King and national holidays. We have that group of plaques, and Exchange Club is the one that sponsored, and sponsored the Freedom Shrine. And to my knowledge, we're the only funeral home in America that has a Freedom Shrine. I literally built the new addition around the Freedom Shrine. And if you walk those halls over there, you can see very easily that the Freedom Shrine, the building was built around the Freedom Shrine. And again, so that people, when they're here, they can stop and take a moment to read the Declaration of Independence.
Bill, can you tell us, what role did you play in the Chamber of Commerce as Troy experienced its building boom during the 1970s?
Okay, I wasn't a charter member of the group, but I did join. I was an early member, and we were able to help our fellow business people get established in Troy to the extent of where they go for various services, what are available, and what facilities are available in the community to help business, and so that we had committee programs where I might work on distribution of materials for the group, or perhaps on advertising, so the chamber was known. So it was a viable organization, and we did a lot for the business community to help new people get established in Troy. And I was the president of the chamber in 1976, in the bicentennial year, and I always tried to have in the programs to make sure that we had a program of interest. We met monthly, usually at the Holiday Inn of Troy, and that we would have an interesting program. And when I was the president, I would have a different clergy person from around the community offer the invocation, and therefore letting the clergy know that we existed, and also for people in the chamber to know that, well, there happens to be an Orthodox minister that we didn't know existed, or a Muslim clergy, and Catholic and Protestant, of course. But so that was one thing that I did in my year as president. But we met monthly and installed our members, and it was always a nice installation, so that when you would be installed in the Troy Chamber, you came out of there not only with a nice plaque, but you felt like, boy, I'm part of something good. And we tried that, perpetuated that.
Now, can you tell us about your efforts in the Rochester Road Business and Professional Association of Troy?
Yes, I can. Councilman Molinar called me one day, and he said, Bill, he said, have you heard about Rochester Road being closed? I said, no, and nothing of it. This would be in about 1971. He said, well, the State Highway Department is planning to close Rochester Road to pedestrian and vehicular traffic at the Big Beaver Creek, which is just north of Big Beaver Road. You can't see it, but it runs right on a parallel to the fire station. They're going to close it. And I said, you mean nothing could go through? He says, yeah, they said they're going to close it to pedestrian and vehicular traffic. So I talked with some of my neighbors along here, and I said, we can't allow this. You know, what do we do if we have a need for a fire engine, or if somebody gets stricken and they need an ambulance? We've got to have access. We've got to have part of the road open. Well, the county road commission said, oh, sorry, that's what the plans are, and that's what it's going to be.
Why was the road being closed?
To widen the bridge, and to make, in preparation for the eventual widening. And I say eventual because there was no plans then to widen, but to get the bridge shored up to the point where it could handle a widening project. But they were going to close the whole thing down to do it. And so we met, And this is a proof of the pudding that a group can make a difference if they go about it in the right way. We met on a weekly basis at first, where it was imperative that we keep the road open. We met with the State Highway Department, we met with the contractors, we met with people from the U.S. Bureau of Roads and the County of Oakland, and we would meet at Holiday Inn. Here again, Holiday Inn was a member, and in order to be a member of the Rochester Road Business and Professional Association of Troy, your business had to, number one, be on Rochester Road, or your congregation be on Rochester Road. And the church had one vote, just like the little mom and pop store had just one vote. Everybody had a vote. And because it was a big church congregation, didn't mean they could outvote the other people. And so we met on weekly basis, and then as things kind of straightened out, when we were getting some understanding with government, we met on a monthly basis, and we met monthly for years. And we only had one purpose, and that was to monitor the traffic volume on Rochester Road, the traffic light, stoplights, public lighting, and things of that sort. We didn't have any other. We didn't have any kind of a program, unless it was someone speaking to us from the U.S. Bureau of Public Roads, or a local politician, which we tried to include them, our congressmen and representatives. And we met, and we had an organization. We were all dues-paying members, and again, each person had one vote. And no matter, like this firm had one vote, and the A&W restaurant next to us had one vote, and across the street had one vote. So that it was nothing that was stacked against any particular member. And we said to government, and this proves, and I've said this for many years, that you can change City Hall if you do it in the right way. We didn't have any kind of sit-down strike where we would sit in the middle of the road and say, until you get this road open, we're going to block it for people to come in. We sat down as ladies and gentlemen and worked out the problems that went along with widening of not only of the bridge, but the eventual widening of the road. And once we convinced government, and that had to be through the U.S. Bureau of Public Roads, that this road had to stay open. We had to have it open. You build the bridge in one half, and when it's finished, you close the other part and do that. And it did. It worked out that way.
So now, as a businessman, you've worked with many active citizens, some volunteers and elected officials. Who stands out in your mind as Troy's most memorable leaders, and why?
I can't put a name or names to it. It was a combined group of a number of people, and it would be unfair for me to say that this particular person or the other was a leader in it or was responsible. Both men and women, a lot of people worked to make Troy what it is today. So Lorraine, I couldn't put a name to it, and I won't, because there were so many good people. I guess we didn't cover the reason why I came to Troy, and let me just jump back, if I could. My fellow students at Wayne State would say, "Oh, Bill Price is going out to Troy. You have to push cows out of the way to go down Rochester Road." And I'd say, "Yes, that's right. We have a few working farms, but we have a lot of potential." And how did I know that, other than driving back and forth every day? I knew that because one day I drove down Rochester Road and there was a sign that appeared. It says, "Future home of the Wayne Oakland Bank." Wow, we're going to have our own bank in Troy. We have to go to Royal Oak to a bank, or up to Rochester or Utica to have a bank. But we're going to have our own bank, the Wayne Oakland Bank. That was number one. Number two is that I had read the statistics from the Archdiocese of Detroit, and I knew the amount of property that the diocese had purchased in this area. Now, why would any sane person buy property in an area where there's nothing, unless they know something that I don't know? So the Diocese of Detroit had the foresight of knowing that this area was going to become something of greatness. And thirdly was the fact that the people of Troy had in their possession the notion that we're going to make Troy something spectacular and big, and it's going to be something that by the turn of the century, according to Detroit Edison, it's going to be a city of 100,000 people. Now, back in 1956, you look at Rochester Road and Crooks Road and Livernois and Coolidge Road, and you say, what, 100,000 people? No way. But Detroit Edison had the foresight of knowing that this area did have possibilities. We never made the 100. We came close to it. But we went from a city of 8,000 or 9,000 when I came to town to what we are today. And I guess we finally ended up somewhere around 90,000 people. But it was the projection of the Detroit Edison, the Diocese of Detroit, that helped me make my decision, and the fact that where a bank settles, there's going to be growth. And sure enough, there was. Now,
we want to get back to your business,
okay,
because while Troy was growing, the Price Funeral Home was growing and changing.
We were growing.
Can you reflect for a moment on how your business and the services you provided have changed and expanded in your 50 years in business?
We haven't changed our service philosophy particularly, because it's always been the same, that we're client-oriented. We're going to do what the client needs to have done. So that hasn't changed. What has changed are the mores of the community. We now see a high increase in cremation where we didn't have it when we started in business. A cremation in 1950s and 60s was just almost unheard of. No one used cremation. Today it's a really high number. High, 60–70%.
Really?
Yeah, and so that, and it's not just here. It's not just this firm. It's all of my colleagues are experiencing the same thing. And I've been active in our state association, the Michigan Funeral Directors, and the National Funeral Directors Associations. And we see this across the board, across the nation. It isn't just Troy, Oakland County. It's Michigan, and it isn't just Michigan. It's state. It's nationwide. So our services haven't changed. We still have service. That's the key. Service to our families, and to help make the ordeal that much easier for them. And so that, therefore, we haven't changed. We still do operate pretty much the way we did 50 years ago, that families are first. It's what the families need, and that's what we'll do. We're servants of the family, and that hasn't changed.
Has your physical facility grown and changed?
Yes, it has. We went from a little farmhouse at 2501 Rochester Road, which is just south of Big Beaver Road on Rochester Road, on the west side, but you wouldn't know it now because the building has changed hands several times, and it was added to, and then it was bricked. When we had it, it was white frame. We took the old porch off and put columns on, just like we have here. And that was kind of our trademark, the columns, the Mount Vernon effect. But yeah, that started the transition from that point to where we are today, where the colonial effect is there. But pretty much we operate on the same premises we did in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, that we're service-oriented to help the community and to do the job properly. Yeah, there's not much change there.
When did you make the physical transition from your original building to this property?
Okay, we moved, and the reason we moved was because of the federal highway that came through, I-75. Well, you have to keep in mind that when we started in business and going across the street to Lolly's Drive-In, there was no I-75. And the busiest road we had was Stevenson Highway. It was a divided road. And then all of a sudden, talk was that the federal highway system was going to become effective and to be in effect. And Michigan got I-75, was one of the first freeways. 94 and some of the others came along later. But I-75 was the factor that changed this area. And oh, how Troy changed. You know, people said, oh my gosh, this is going to, the configuration of the highway through Troy is going to have the East Siders against the West Siders and the North against the South. And it really never happened. If you lived on the west side of the freeway, fine. If you lived on the east side, that was fine too, because it didn't, not one particular area got more developed than the other. Probably the west side was developed sooner than later. The Coolidge Big Beaver corridor, and from there down to Maple Road and up as far as maybe Waddles. But this side of town got almost the same treatment as far as growth, so that it was pretty much even.
So in the 1960s then, you moved to this building?
It was 1956 we opened it on 2501 Rochester Road, and 1980 we opened this building.
Okay.
1980.
And as we've walked through your building, you have grown in this wonderful collection of artwork and memorabilia from the families that you've served. Could you give us an insight on that?
Oh yeah, well, if we just turn around and look at that particular plate up there on the wall, the rose plate, that plate was painted by a lady by the name of Dolores DeTour, and Dolores worked for the Veterans Service Office in Royal Oak. And when part of our services was to take families to the Veterans Service Office so they could obtain their benefits. And that's where I saw the beautiful work she did. She did it on her lunch hours and breaks and things like that. She'd be working on these on a particular plate. And so when she came up time for retirement, I asked her, I said, Dolores, can I buy one of your plates? And I didn't specify this one. I said, you know, I would be happy to buy anything that she had. And she said, no, you can't. But she said, I'm going to do one better. I'm going to give you one. And she gave me this plate and painted it particularly for us. And it's been hanging proudly right there, and as long as I am around, it's going to stay. And yeah, we have in this curio cabinet here with the birds and the animals, there's some in there that are placed by people in memory of loved ones in their family. Through curio cabinets in other parts of the building, we have the same thing. One place that one of the curios has the Iwo Jima flag raising at Iwo Jima. That was given to me by a family. So I thought I want to share that with the public, and it shows the 6 Marines raising the flag on Mount Suribachi. So it's just about everything in here has a bit of history to it. And our friend Jack Turner, that was so active in getting the Veterans Memorial here in Troy, he had a part, and just on and on and on. Carol Reschke we have her rendering in glass of apple blossom time in Michigan. That's just down the hall. Oh, we had just done any number of items that local people have done, and we've placed them in the funeral home so people can remember them. And before this interview, you and I were sitting in the lounge, one of the lounges, having coffee, and you saw a particular ship that was on the mantle in this north lounge area, and that was from a family of a man who lived in Troy, and his hobby was building ships. And I asked the family if they would consider loaning us one to put in the lounge so we could share. And there again, they said, no, you can't. We're not going to loan it to you. We're going to give you one. And they gave me the ship that's in there, and we proudly display it. And just like Dolores's plate and the particular wildlife that are in this curio, and all through the building, those sorts of things are there. And then at our flagpole site in front of the building, we have a Veterans Memorial that is dedicated as a Veterans Memorial, and we had it rededicated a couple of years ago. And that is in memory of those who gave a supreme sacrifice for our freedom. And we had that before the one at City Hall. So I wanted to do something that would recognize the military from Troy that had given the supreme sacrifice.
You've also maintained your family residence here at your business. Would you tell us about your family? Okay,
we have always lived at the store. We've always lived over the funeral home. At 2501 we live there, and 3725 we've lived here. At one time, a lot of funeral directors lived at their businesses. Today, almost no one. Maybe an apartment for a night person. But anyway, we've lived here right along. Susan is my second wife, and my first marriage, we had 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. And one of the boys passed away. He died as a result of a car accident, excuse me, up on Auburn Road. That was Brian. But Scott and Kevin and Karen survive. And Kevin and Karen are in California, both working out there. Kevin is a stockbroker, and he works in Los Angeles, and Karen is with the state racing commission, horse racing commission. So she works in horse racing. And the other son, Scott, is a truck driver, a long-distance truck driver.
Do you have any extra thoughts or comments that you would like to add as a lifelong resident of Troy who saw this community go from a rural township when you were a little boy all the way up to a big city, as a businessman, or a man who, I think if there's one word that defines you, it's been public service, whether it was as a business person or a member of the Rotary or as a former Marine? What comments do you have?
I've dedicated my life to Troy. There's no question about that. Going on 51 years. And then the years before that, when I was in Rochester and in Pontiac, funeral service has been a vital part of my life. I just regret that my children didn't want to go into it. Susan has taken the bull by the horns. 3 years I've been out of the picture, where I couldn't do day-by-day work, and she's helped out. And she isn't licensed, but she works with the licensed personnel with John and Nicole. And we sometimes have contract people that help us. So I guess I could say that where do we go from here? I don't know. I don't know. I know I want to stay active as long as I can. I sometimes get some people raising an eyebrow when I tell them I'm not old enough to retire. You know, if it's people I went to high school with, and they've been retired for 15 years and are enjoying their grandchildren in Florida. But I would like to be able to travel more than we have. And the reason that I haven't traveled is because of my illness this last 3 years. But who knows? I don't know what the answer is to that. You know, I guess time will tell.